Hey, so I am now on the line with a Miss Mimi Mariposa, who is from Nashville, Tennessee. You are currently a Brazilian Zouk dancer, instructor, organizer for the past 7 or so years, we'll say.
It's been a while.
You have a background in ballroom as well as Latin dance. Is that correct?
Yes, that is.
How are you doing today, Miss Mimi?
I'm doing great. I got my coffee.
Hey,
it's my morning. It's your evening. So
it is. Exactly. How I normally start these out, I would love to hear about your childhood growing up in Nashville, Tennessee. Could you please tell me about that?
Yeah. So I have pretty fond memories of growing up. So I was very much like a tomboy. And so I grew up on 5 acres, like out. So I say I'm from Nashville, but there's always this caveat of like, you say Nashville because no one else can find anything, because no one can find anything else on the map, right? So I'm really from the suburbs, which I think here people like, and here being Virginia, kind of closer to DC, people would consider it the country. Like our neighbors had horses, and like the streets didn't have like street lights like when you got towards my house. So like I grew up 30 minutes outside of Nashville, and we grew up on about 5 acres, and there was like woods. And so we would go, out exploring and climbing trees, and just a very outdoors experience. And I loved it. And I have 2 brothers. And so we're all pretty close in age. And so we get into all sorts of mess. But it was fun. And I grew up out there, and I stayed there until about 5-6 years ago. 5 or 6 years ago now. And then I moved to the Virginia area for work.
I'm curious. Tell me, what were some of your favorite childhood hobbies? What did you enjoy doing?
So I was big into sports. So I really loved playing like basketball and lacrosse and soccer and all those fun things. I also love to swim. I still to this day love to swim. Horseback riding. I was also and still am a super nerd. So like loved to read. Like I remember like we would go to like stores, and I'd beg my parents to buy me books, and they were like, how can we say no to a book? Like, like that's just not even fair. But that's what I wanted. I read avidly. So yeah, I had a lot of interest, I guess, actually. I also acted. I was in school plays and things like that. So I just liked to dabble in everything. That was kind of my thing.
That's awesome. I'm very curious to know, tell me how important was music in your household growing up?
Yeah, so music was big. So my brother's actually a music major and majored in trumpet. So, and then I was a percussionist, and I was in marching band and concert band and all sorts of stuff like that. And so my parents aren't musicians, but they love music. So, music was always on in the house. Like, my mom would be in the kitchen, like cleaning or cooking or, whatever. That was like a very central place in the house. Always had music on. We would always dance around. And so it was always, I have very fond memories of that. And I think they were both very encouraging of us to explore the arts. And I think having that background in percussion and also having like a very musical brother was really helpful, because I learned the music, the foundations of music and kind of music theory early. And that really helped my dance later. And it's something that I realize not everyone has experienced. So I feel very fortunate, but it was definitely, I had a lot of fun. Like I competed on a drum line all the way through college. So yeah, it was super fun. But music has a very special place in my heart.
Okay, and so tell me this real quick. Take it back to young Mimi. What did young Mimi want to be when she grew up? What was her goal, her ambition?
I really wanted to be Princess Leia. Let's be honest. A princess, very, but I wanted to be a galactic space princess with a pistol. That's what I wanted to be, or a Jedi. It's so funny growing up. All I can remember about like whenever people would be like, what do you want to be? I always had a different answer. So there for a while, I wanted to be, actually for a good chunk of time, I wanted to be a, what is it called? An archaeologist, like an Egyptian archaeologist, like specializing in Egypt. So I had a bunch of like books on Egypt and like hieroglyphs and all sorts of stuff. But yeah, it really changed a lot. Although I did end up doing archaeology in my undergrad. So that's my undergraduate degree is in anthropology and archaeology. So I guess, I did baby Mimi proud. But I did not stick in that career. But yeah, I do remember that one sticking around for quite a while. I really liked like ancient cultures and languages and things like that. Like I find culture very fascinating. So.
And so where did you go for your undergrad? What school?
Middle Tennessee State University, MTSU. Yeah, so I went to MTSU. It's about 30 minutes south of Nashville.
And is that when you were first introduced to social dancing, or when did that come about?
It was, yeah. So I had taken some dance classes and stuff as a kid, and everyone's always like, oh, did you start dancing when you were a child? And I'm like, I mean, technically, yes, but like, I didn't stick with it. So I don't feel like I can say like, oh, I've been dancing forever. But I definitely took ballet and tap and stuff when I was littler and gymnastics. But it wasn't until undergrad that I really got introduced to like the partner dancing world. So I was taking a ballet class and which is really great. I highly recommend ballet for everybody. It'll whip you into shape. But it was fun and I enjoyed it. But there was there was a partner dancing class that I decided to take with a former boyfriend, and we fought our whole way through it, as couples can do. But we both fell in love with dancing. So after we broke up after the class, we both went to separate dance clubs. So he went to the swing dance club and I went to the salsa club. And that has forever shaped the rest of my dance career. But yeah, I joined the salsa club. And I think it was one of the first meetings I went to. The head of the salsa club, his name was Justin. We're still good friends today. He was like, hey, there's not like many people here. Do you want to try Zouk? And I was like, okay, sure. I've never heard of that. And he taught me my first steps of Zouk and I hated it. And I was like, oh, I don't like this. This is not for me. Because he tried to do like some head motion kind of stuff. And I was like, oh, I'll stick with salsa. Thanks. And bachata, I just discovered bachata and was like, that was my love. But we started dating. And so his favorite dance was Zouk. And so he was like, okay, well, I'm going to go do the Zouk stuff. I know you don't like it, so you don't have to come. And of course, me being like, wanting to go with him and do stuff with him, I was like, I guess I could go. Like, I could go if it's a Zouk thing. That's fine. So then through further exposure and getting better at the dance, I fell in love with it. And I was like, oh, this is good. Now that I actually know some basics and like got to know the dance a little bit better. That was really helpful. So so really MTSU Salsa Club, that's where I started.
So real quick, I want to kind of get this timeline down. So you start with salsa and some bachata. How long did you dance salsa and bachata then?
I mean, I guess technically I never stopped really, but I guess I didn't. So I was really focusing on salsa and bachata and ballroom earlier on in college. And I'd been introduced to Zouk and I liked it, especially since like me and Justin were dating at that time. But salsa and bachata and ballroom were my main focuses. So I was going like salsa and bachata dancing every night kind of thing. Once I got out of college, I really went more into the ballroom realm, and mostly because that's where you can get trained and like they have studios everywhere and they'll teach you how to teach and like you can get a job there. So that's why I went the ballroom route, but I was still known as like the salsa person or the salsa bachata person. And like to some degree Zouk. So it was several years before I really focused on Zouk hardcore as like, I'm going to teach Zouk. Stop asking me to teach other things. Just because Zouk is so niche, even though it's my favorite and I'm super passionate about it and have for most of my dance career, it was never something that I could make a career off of, or was willing to make the necessary sacrifices to make a career out of it. So, so I thought, oh, if I go the ballroom route, then I can make a career off dancing, teaching dance, and also do Zouk, like in that realm. And that never really quite worked out. So that was a spoiler for the future. That never worked out.
So real quick, okay, I definitely understand that. Tell me this then.
Yeah.
I want to hear about your beginner stage in salsa, bachata, as well as Brazilian Zouk. So let's just start with salsa and bachata. Tell me about your beginner stage in that.
Yeah. So I took that partner dancing class, and it was, the way it was structured is it was like, an elective class for one semester.
Uh-huh.
And they basically, the whole point was to introduce you to as many dances as they could. So I think throughout the semester, we got introduced to like 5 or 6 kinds of dance.
Uh-huh.
And I remember the teacher refused to teach us bachata because it was too sensual. So I remember that was my first time ever hearing of bachata, and was like, oh, it's sensual. Ooh. Like a little bit like, oh, we can't do that. Scandalous. But, we did some like hustle and swing dancing and salsa. And like, I'm sure there were other dances that I literally cannot remember at this point. But yeah, so that was kind of a very introductory class. I really came out of it thinking like, wow, I know a lot, but I did not. And so when I joined the salsa club, that was a little bit of a chunk of time later, after my former boyfriend and I had split. So I was, I guess, kind of like dancing with him at that point. And I thought like, wow, we're so good at swing. And we really liked swing as a couple. And so when that ended, I was like, I really liked that salsa. Let me go join that salsa club. One, because I still wanted to be able to dance. And obviously I didn't have my partner anymore. And so I was like, all right, well, I guess I'll go find other people. Mm-hmm. So I think that's really, I guess I would describe it as stumbling into salsa, really, from swing dance. And I remember being super conservative in my movements. Like I didn't want to make big movements. And I remember Justin specifically, he was teaching me salsa, and I forget what we were doing, but he was like, okay, I'm going to need you to stick your arm out. And I was like, okay. And I was like, and he was like, no, Mimi, I need you to stick it all the way out. And I was like, what do you mean? And so he like pulled my arm out, and I remember feeling so uncomfortable. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, I don't know. I had just never been in a position where that was like, oh yeah, be as big as you can, So I was very nervous about that. And I was very, I liked to stay small. And so I think salsa, especially in that earlier time, really helped me to like learn to present and like be big. And so we had this weekly dance social, and I think it's still happening, but it was on Wednesdays, and it was free. And it was at, actually it was like at a gay bar in Nashville, and you could go and you could dance salsa and bachata. And I think they would throw in some other dances too. This is well before they had Zouk in Nashville. And I remember bachata came on. And so I went to the sidelines, and I was like, oh, no, I don't do this dance. And this gentleman came over, and he was like, you want to dance? And I was like, oh, I don't know bachata. And he was like, oh, I'll show you. It's super easy. And I was like, oh, okay, sure. And he literally taught me like the 1, 2, 3 tap, 1, 2, 3 tap. And I was like, oh, I feel like I was misled here. I feel like this is actually pretty fun. So that's actually how I discovered bachata. Was literally some guy at a social was like, no, you should try it. And he was right. So then I started taking some bachata classes and absolutely fell in love with it, which is funny to me now, because I was super like, oh, I don't want to be sensual. So I was very much like, let's do footwork and let's, have fun. And I remember the first time at that social, they would have a free workshop beforehand, and it was a bachata workshop. And I took it, and they had us do close embrace for the first time. And we had to do one of those like where you're like really close and like kind of get a little bit lower, so your legs are very much in between each other. And I remember being so scandalized. I was like, oh my gosh, this is what they were talking about. it's so funny because now I'm like a Zouk dancer and do like, that's not even an issue. But at the time, I was very new to it. And so it felt very uncomfortable. I was very awkward, like really awkward. But I'm really glad that I continued and pursued it and I got more comfortable. So it just took time. But yeah.
I understand that. I'm very curious. You said something earlier, or you spoke on it just now as well. Let's say for someone else who maybe very similar to you, maybe shy or unconfident or just unused to being big or show you're close to somebody else. How do you think somebody can overcome that? Is it just over time, or is there something you did that helped you overcome your inhibitions?
Yeah. I think for me, some things that helped was having people that I trusted there. And so for instance, like the other salsa club members would all go to this social. So I had a handful of people there that I was already training with and was already comfortable with and felt safe with, right? That's the key at this event. So, it was kind of like I felt safe to explore. And I think that's such an important part that of that beginner process that we don't maybe emphasize as much, is that it's really important to feel safe. And when you feel safe, then you can explore your things that make you uncomfortable. So having that person there was helpful. And then also taking classes. I know that sounds super cliche, but like having someone in a class, like a teacher, a trusted teacher saying, put your hand here. It's okay to do this. This is not sexual. This is not an advance. Like, this is how it should feel. I think was really helpful for me too. I think had I just been on the dance floor and someone just did that to me, I probably would have been like, what the heck are you doing? But because I took the classes and I had that structure of like, okay, this is okay and this is not okay. This is safe. This is not safe, or, that kind of thing. It really helped. That structure really helped me. And having that group of people that I could also go back to and be like, this happened. Is that right? Is that weird? Or like, so-and-so dipped me and I was kind of uncomfortable with it. And they're like, oh yeah, they shouldn't be doing that. Or like, that was really helpful to learn the ropes of the community as well. Cause like, you see professionals do all sorts of things that on the social dance floor with a stranger, you may not want to do. And navigating that, navigating how to say no and how to protect myself dancing and how to kind of be more of a defensive dancer. I don't particularly like that term, but that kind of idea of like, oh, I'm about to be dipped. I don't have to dip if I don't want to, like, and being told that's okay. Like that kind of stuff really helped.
Why do you say, is it defensive dance, or what term do you not like? And why don't you like it?
I don't like it just because I don't want people, like, personally, because I lead as well. If I was going into a dance with a person and they were defensive, I would be like, oh no, what did I do? Or like, or like, I want my follow to feel comfortable. So I feel like when you say be a defensive dancer, I hate the idea of telling people to go into a dance and be like on guard, because, people are there to have fun and relax and be creative. And I don't think having a defensive mindset is like the most enjoyable or also the most creative or the safest place to be in a creative space. But I also do understand that when you're in a social, especially with hundreds, thousands of people, you can't just throw yourself to the wind either. So I like the idea of being a defensive dancer, and I think it's an important thing. And there's definitely like skills and different techniques that help you stay safer. But the term, I've heard that defensive dancer, and I'm like, oh, that makes me think of driving, where people are going to like honk at you. You know what I mean? So I don't want that in my dancing.
so I'm curious. I guess what do you think would be a better term, a better phrase to refer to it as? Do you have one?
Maybe just like I don't have one like off the top of my head, but I guess just like with that question, I like the idea of like a conscious dancer, like making conscious choices of like, oh yes, I'm comfortable with this, or like, oh, I don't like that. Like, I've gone into dances, so I do Zouk obviously, so I do head motion, and sometimes my neck hurts. Or like, sometimes my balance is off. I have inner ear issues. And so sometimes like I'm not having a good balance day and I'll be like, hey, can we not do head motion? And they'll try and lead it on me. They'll say yes, but sometimes memory or like habit will kick in and they'll try and lead it and I'll stop them and be like, oh, sorry, can't do that. Or like, oh, yep, I can't do head motion. They're like, oh, right. It's not a malicious thing, but it's like a protecting my own boundaries, right? Just being conscious of my own limits, where I'm at that day, how I'm feeling, and being willing to nicely or consciously protect that boundary has really gone a long way for me and my partner, whoever I'm dancing with, to be like, make the experience better for me and being like the owner of that. And as much as I can be, right? Because it is a partner dance. So that other person has to be respectful of that too. But yeah, so maybe conscious dancer.
Okay. I like a conscious dance. I definitely understand that. I want to ask you this, since you said you both lead and follow. I'm pretty sure there are a lot of leaders out there who want to be the best lead possible. So let me ask you this: what can leaders do to make sure that their followers feel safe? Do you have any advice, any tips, wisdom on that?
Yeah. So, my gosh, there's so much. I'll keep it short. I think first and foremost, knowing how the body works, like how your own body works. I'm a very much a proponent of learn how to move yourself before moving another person or asking another person to move. And I think that's sometimes a missed step. I know I hear a lot of my students, but also I know I've fallen into this myself when I'm learning to lead. It's like, oh, I need to go, take another class and learn another fancy pattern. Like my follow is going to be bored. And I've done my 5 really comfortable moves and now I got to throw 6 like experimental things. And what ends up happening a lot of times is those moves that aren't quite in your body, or those things that you think you're leading, but you may not be leading because you haven't figured out the mechanics within yourself, can really feel rough. And it's very easy when you're thinking like pattern, just to completely overlook the follow, the connection. And when that happens, it's very easy to feel rough. It's also very easy to kind of ignore, not on purpose, but ignore the boundaries that your follow is putting out, the signals that your follow is putting out. And also if your follow wants to be creative and is like doing something and you got your blinders on, then you cut them off and it's like, oh, that's a womp right there. So I think learning how to move yourself and really being intentional with learning how to move and be stable as your own dancer is such a big part of being a comfortable, safe lead. And then because I think that the other half of that, right, is to be in tune with the person that you're dancing with, right? So if you get onto that dance floor, it's a 50-50 partnership. You win or lose together. So, going in with that mentality, sometimes I'll hear leads be like, oh, well, I make the decisions, or like, well, I decide what happens. And that's true to an extent. But sometimes I feel like that particular mentality can be a little like take the agency away from the follow. And I think if we have more of a mindset, and like when I go into it, I think of us as we're both dancers. I don't know if I've used this on the internet yet, but sometimes I think of it like a book club. Like we're both reading the same book. And as the lead, I'm like leading the book club. But like we both have to talk about the book, which would be the music, right? So we're both interpreting, we're both listening, we're both in that moment together. I'm just, setting the stage. I'm the one that's like cleaned up my living room and like set out cookies. You know what I mean? So I like to think of it that way, where I'm the one leading the discussion. But if you think about it as like a partnership, I think that creates a lot more of a safe environment for people in general.
I definitely understand that. I understand everything you're saying. I'm very curious. Is this something that just comes with time and continued practice?
Yeah. So, I mean, with anything, a skill, right, comes with time and consistency. So practicing consistently, taking classes, learning from kind of like what I was saying earlier when I was super new and was like uncomfortable with everything, taking classes with people that you trust and that are like in the style that you want and that sort of thing is so, so important. But also having that practice time of like, working it into your body. I know I've heard from a lot of leads, and again, I've fallen into this too. I'm not like crapping on leads here. This is my experience as well. Sometimes it can feel like, oh, I can't practice my leading. I have to be on the dance floor to practice my leading. And that's not really, that's not really the case. There's a lot you can work on by yourself and that needs to be worked on. And yes, you can absolutely build it by like going social dancing for 10 years, but you could also be working on it alone and go way faster. So it's really just, it really is just like, how much time do you have to put into it? How much money, of course, do you have to put into it? But the more time and the more consistently you work on it, of course, the faster you're going to build the skill. And so I know that that's always like the letdown answer of like, it takes time and practice, womp, but it really does benefit. It really, over time.
Yeah, I definitely understand that. I definitely do. I asked you about salsa and bachata, so I'll do the follow-up question. Tell me about your beginner stage in Brazilian Zouk. What was that like for you?
Yeah, so as I said earlier, the first time I experienced it, I hated it. Now, in fairness, I feel like that does deserve a caveat of like, I was a beginner dancer. Like, it wasn't that I was like an expert in salsa and bachata and then just like, hated Zouk. It was more of like, I had no idea what I was doing in anything. And I was already so far out of my comfort zone, I think, with salsa and bachata, just at that stage, that something new that seemed even scarier. So I also mentioned before I have inner ear issues. And so it's very easy for me to get dizzy. And especially at that time, I wasn't trained in dancing yet. And so my body wasn't accustomed to spinning really or anything like that. And so I think he tried to do like a snake, like one of these. And my ears were just like, I don't know what you're doing, but we don't like it. So I got super dizzy, a little bit nauseous, which is super easy for me to do. And once I'm dizzy, it's a little bit hard for me I need to like sit down, sip some water, take a second. So I was like, oh yeah, I'll never be able to do this dance. So it felt like a barrier to entry really was that head motion and using the head a lot and like off axis stuff. I was like, oh yeah, I'll never be able to do that. So whatever. And then once I started taking some classes, it always goes back to that. And I started learning the basics, which have nothing to do with head motion. And like, you don't do anything with this yet. I was like, oh, I can dance Zouk without doing all this stuff. That's great. I think I had a lot more fun with it at that point and was like, oh, right, I can just learn all the footwork because Zouk has a lot of footwork that's different than salsa and bachata. And learning lateral was a job and a half. I remember I struggled with that. That's like the second basic step of Zouk. And I was just like, what are my feet supposed to be doing? And I actually have a video of me at one of these social events from like the first few months of me dancing Zouk. And I'm both very impressed with myself and also like appalled. I look at it because I'm like, oh my God, that was me. But also I was doing my best. I was having a good time. And I think that was the most important part, was kind of just allowing myself to be bad at it at the beginning and just being like, yeah, this will take some time. And then I focused on the head motion part later. And I really was able to train my body and my ears to become more comfortable with that. And I got better at that. So, but those early years, man, that was rough. I was very scared of head motion, which I think I hear that from a lot of people. So
I definitely understand that. I have like two questions I want to ask you.
Yeah.
For someone who may be intimidated or maybe scared or unwilling to start Brazilian Zouk, tell me what kept you going in those difficult times you faced? Why did you stick with it?
Yeah, no, that's a great one. I was going to be like, let me answer it from a lead and a follow perspective. But then I was like, oh, wait, it's the same answer. The community. I mean, just straight up, it's, I think that's one of the reasons why most people get into it, right? Is they have friends that do it or a significant other that does it. And then they make friends and they like the community. So because I was dating, especially those early days, I was dating my then dance partner, who his favorite dance was Zouk. So like, it's kind of hard to escape your partner's favorite dance. So we would travel, and we took a few friends with us from like the salsa club, and we would travel to a city about 2 hours away. And because they had weekly classes and socials and things like that in Zouk, because there wasn't Zouk in Nashville at the time. And so, I mean, we would basically go on a road trip like every week, right? And so, I mean, we became very close friends with this kind of little group of us that would travel from Nashville. And then we met it was Knoxville. So we met the Knoxville people, and we became friends with them because we were spending all this time with them every week. And also, when you're in a group who are hungry for knowledge and who want to get better, it's very infectious. So even though it was tough and even though it was frustrating, you know, we were all going through that. Even we were all at different levels too. So, I mean, we were all having like, oh my gosh, I just can't get this thing. And like, I've practiced it 100 times and I just can't get it. We all had those moments, and it was all like, oh, well, let me help you, or let's practice it. Or, you know, let's go do something that's not dance related for a second. Let's go, you know, get drinks or something. And I think having that community, having that group was really, really important. And even though it was a small group, because I know for a lot of people, they're not in a city that has like a huge Zouk population, but even just having 1 to 2 people that you're like in it together is so vital. It is very, very hard. And I have friends who are like by themselves in cities, and it's very hard. And so they end up traveling. So if you have the money and the time, traveling to Zouk congresses and weekenders and things like that can be so, so helpful, because it really is that community aspect.
Well, let me ask you this first. How long have you been teaching?
Probably like 7-ish years.
Okay.
Do you want me to go into detail about that?
Well, we definitely can. Let me ask you this first.
Yeah.
And you can kind of hopefully segue into both of them. Okay. Tell me about your beginner stage in teaching, because just because you're good at something does not automatically make you a good teacher. They
are very different skills.
Definitely.
Sure. Yeah. So my first foray into teaching was at that salsa club. So, you know, Justin and I, at that time, were dating. We're not dating anymore. I feel like I've talked about me and him dating for so long at this point that I feel like it's important to say we dated for like 6 months. So like, and then we were still friends and taught together after that. But yeah, so while we were dating, I would assist him. And I very much was like the picturesque, like, didn't say anything, like there as a prop, don't talk to me, I don't know anything kind of person. So it was really good for me, I think, to just at least see the process, what that looks like. And also just enough of a spark to be like, I want to do that. I think I could be good at that. And so we started teaching Zouk together because there was no other Zouk dancers in Nashville. It was just me and him. And so we were like, okay, well, if we start teaching classes, we can have friends to like learn Zouk together. So, and which is ultimately what happened. We ended up getting like a good core group of people. And I mean, the classes weren't like super successful, but also like I wasn't a good teacher. I will go so far as to say I was not a good teacher yet. I like to think I'm a good teacher now, but at the time I was learning a lot. But we did get really good feedback from people. So sometimes people wouldn't come back and we would reach out and be like, hey, just like checking in. And they would, to their credit, be very nice and give us very real feedback. And that was really helpful, actually. It hurt, but it was good to know. And I think that's an important thing for anyone who's an aspiring teacher, is that you need the feedback and it's not going to feel good. And that's okay. But you're going to have to make mistakes as you go. And this is, I mean, I guess for dance or life or anything, you have to make mistakes. You have to be bad at it sometimes. And so one of the reasons I went into ballroom after college was because I wanted teacher training. And they offered teacher training if you became an instructor. So there was a ballroom studio like 10 minutes from my parents' house. So I graduated from college, because I promised my parents I would, even though I was super into dance. And they were like, yeah, but you're going to graduate though, right? So I graduated. And and so I basically walked into this dance studio with very little experience and was like, so I want to be a dance teacher. And they were like, oh, great, here's an application. And basically what you would do is before you could teach and before you got students or anything like that, you had to basically apply and join their teacher training. And it was every day for 2 hours, I think, or something like that. And you would go in and for 2 hours, you would drill technique, patterns, teaching, literal teaching training, all that kind of stuff. And you had to do that for like several months. And then at some point you could take the tests, right? There was like a practical test. And basically you had to take one of the senior instructors and teach an entire lesson as if they had walked in and were a new student. You had to teach them all the way through their first lesson, all the way through to them leaving. And if you passed, you got a contract and you basically became contracted. And there's other stuff that happens after that, but that was the gist. And so I did that for months. And I look back at that time and I'm really thankful that I did that, because even though it wasn't Zouk and it wasn't salsa and it wasn't bachata, it was waltz and tango and foxtrot and things like that. It was ballroom. It was some of the best training ever. And again, very uncomfortable, just constantly being put on your toes, constantly being like, okay, Mimi, show us the footwork for the lead for the waltz box, and just being like, okay. And then getting immediate feedback on how you did. And, it wasn't mean, like no one was mean, but it was very strict in the sense that like you got it right or wrong. Like, and they expected you to like take the feedback and be better the next time. So it was pretty serious. I mean, it was also for free. So, I mean, the idea was that you were coming to get training to teach for them. And so even though it was free in the sense that, there's after you got signed on a contract, you still had to go to teacher training. So, I mean, they were putting it on regardless. So it wasn't like, one-on-one or anything. It was like a group of teacher trainer teaching people wanting to become teachers. But yeah, it was pretty intense, but very, very, very good. And I'm really glad I had that experience. I ultimately did not end up signing a contract with them. I never got offered a contract, just total disclosure. I wasn't very good at the selling part. And if you know anything about ballroom, it's a business. I mean, it's a money-making business. And one of the most important things for them wasn't the teaching. It wasn't how well you knew the information. It was, could you sell the lessons? And I was much more interested in the dancing part and the teaching part. And I was much less interested in the sales part. And so I kept flunking the sales part, is basically what happened. And I finally was just like, I don't think this is for me. And so I ended up finding a independent studio who had kind of a similar situation. They had a teacher training program for free, but instead of it being for free, you had to come to all their parties and dance with all the students. So that was kind of the trade-off, was like, okay, we'll train you, but you have to come to all of our stuff and be partners for all of our students. Which again was a lot, but great training, like really great. And again, all about teaching and sales and all that stuff. But because it was an independent studio, they were like, we might give you students, but like you need to find your own students. And like, we'll teach you ways to get students, but like ultimately you're an independent instructor here and you're going to have to do that yourself, because that's kind of the trade-off, which was really good for me. It was really good training in marketing and like self-branding. That's actually when I became Mimi Mariposa. It's not my legal name. A lot of people think it is. And I really wish I could whip out my ID and have Mimi Mariposa on it. And I did look into legally changing my name, but that is like a whole can of worms that I'm not willing to, to open. But yeah, so personal branding, like becoming Mimi Mariposa, and which was a nickname given to me, by the way. I didn't just pick that. But yeah, was really good dance training, but was also really good. Just also how to talk to students, like etiquette as a teacher at a social, dancing with all levels of people and still making it enjoyable for them. Especially when they're nervous, right? Because you're the teacher, right? And then having to like navigate that in a dance setting was also really, really good. So when people ask me about like teaching, and people have approached me and been like, oh, I want to be a teacher. And I'm like, great. It's a whole other thing. Like it's a whole other skill. So it really does take its own dedication and training, honestly.
Oh, this is very true. And as a teacher, you have a lot of responsibility as well. So it is a lot. It is a lot.
Thank you guys so much for getting to this point in the interview. We just had so much to talk about and we're having so much fun that we decided to split it into 3 parts. So please do go check out part 2 and 3. And if you'd like to know what I'm up to currently, please do check out my website, mariposadancellc.com. And thank you again. Bye, guys.